Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for this performance by the Hendrix College Wind Ensemble. Thanks to those of you who are here in our audience, and many thanks to those of you who are joining us via the live stream. I know my parents are watching from Pennsylvania, so I'm so thrilled that we have this tech to be able to get them and lots of other folks involved in this concert tonight. I want to thank you all especially because obviously the world is going through a very strange time right now, and I felt like today has felt like almost like the Twilight Zone. So it's just fitting that it ended up that our concert theme was persist. The idea of persisting through all kinds of different trials that we might be going through, including right now as we try to navigate a very uncertain world. So these students up here in front of you are also navigating uncertain times as we move forward here with our semester at Hendrix. So they themselves, just by the nature of being here and playing a concert in the midst of all of this, are demonstrating tremendous persistence because we've worked so hard on this music and we wanted to share it with you tonight. So here we are. And so we are really thrilled to share with you this concert on the theme of persistence. And tonight we're gonna look at it from a lot of different angles because composers have written about the idea of persistence for a long time, and they've used a lot of different source material, so to speak, to make that happen. So our first piece was Festivo by Václav Nelibel, a Czech-American composer, and his music often features motor rhythms, which in themselves are a form of persistence, but the piece you just heard, the bigger idea of Festivo, is this idea of confrontation. So you probably heard a lot of back and forth between the two antagonists, the woodwinds on the one side and the brass and percussion on the other side. So this piece in itself is all about the idea of persisting in this, shall we say, debate or a heated argument between the two groups. And I'm sure you heard the back and forth between the groups, neither one really willing to give in to the other. We're now going to move to a different kind of persistence that's found in the natural world, and this is a piece called Ancient Flower by the Japanese composer Yukiko Nishimura. So here, Yukiko Nishimura has written a piece that evokes the idea of a tiny little ancient flower as it persists its way to actually blooming from its tiny little self. So to create this imagery, she uses traditional Western style harmony, but she uses it in a way that evokes an atmosphere of the Orient, and that's where her own background, her heritage as a Japanese composer comes into play. So we hope you enjoy this really beautiful piece, Ancient Flower. The other ways that composers have evoked this idea of persistence is by looking at history. And the next piece is going to feature or be about, essentially, a religious group known as the Shakers, who emigrated from England to colonial America in 1774. Shakers were often viewed as a very simple people, but yet they were pioneering in many ways and absolutely steadfast in their religious beliefs. And music was a really important part of their worship. Now, you are probably very likely familiar with the Shaker hymn known as Simple Gifts, because it was made famous by Aaron Copland in the ballet he wrote called Appalachian Spring. And if you can't quite recall the melody to your mind right now, I'm sure as soon as we start to play it, you'll recognize it. So Simple Gifts has become a musical representation of the Shakers' spirit, their persistent kind of spirit to go to a new country, to keep their religion alive in a new place, despite all the challenges they might face in doing so. And we're excited now to share with you an adaptation of this particular tune, Simple Gifts, by the American composer John Zedeklik. So this piece is called Chorale and Shaker Dance, and it's got two main parts. Simply the chorale at the beginning, and then the Shaker dance. It's as simple as that, but the Shaker dance is represented through the use of the melody Simple Gifts. Now, it's not a straight translation of Simple Gifts, but you'll be able to recognize it. And you'll hear John Zedeklik take that tune and morph it into so many different things, and maybe that could be a representation of the different trials, the different things that the Shakers would have experienced, from the highest of joys at their successes to the lowest of lows, perhaps, as they were working through the challenges they faced here in this new country. So we hope you enjoy this tremendous piece. This is an absolute cornerstone of the band repertoire. We're really excited to share it with you. This is Chorale and Shaker Dance. Our next piece also focuses on the persistence of a group of people, but through a completely different musical lens. Trust me, this is a huge change of pace from what we just played. John Mackey is an American composer who has made incredible contributions to the band repertoire, and the piece that we're going to share with you tonight is called Night on Fire. This is the piece that the Wind Ensemble last semester voted on to play this semester. They've got an opportunity to do a repertoire vote to choose one piece that we do in the next semester. And this was the winner, and boy, did they pick a doozy for themselves. So this comes from a larger work called The Soul Has Many Motions. And this was a piece that John Mackey was writing about moments of transformation and change. He was writing it for the retirement of a major figure in the band world, someone who was the head of the UIL system in Texas, a giant organization. So this piece was for his retirement, and it was all about this idea of change, moving on into a new chapter. And the piece evokes this idea of motion, both of the body physically onto the next chapter, but also of the soul onto the next chapter. So Mackey, about this movement specifically, has this to say. He says that Night on Fire is supposed to depict the wild dancing of a nomadic camp. So we could not possibly be more different from the Shakers in this particular musical sense. So what we're going to imagine here is a group of people whose very survival is rooted in being persistent about finding food and shelter as they make their way across whatever land you might imagine them to be on. So we might imagine them here in this piece, after a hard day of travel or maybe hunting, letting loose in a wild and frenetic manner around a campfire at nighttime. So to transport us to this distant culture, you're going to hear some interesting percussion sounds in particular. You'll notice over here to my right, we've got an instrument called the djembe, which is not a drum that is often used in wind ensemble music, but I think Mackey was using it here to try to evoke a sense of a distant kind of place. And the djembe tonight will be played by our very own Keen Salmon. So we hope you enjoy this really fantastic piece, Night on Fire. returned to this idea of looking at persistence in the natural world, although this time in a very different way from the way we did before, and in a way that's very much connected to events that are happening in the world around us. Jennifer Jolly is the composition professor at Texas Tech, and she is the composer of our next piece, Ash. So I want to read you the program note that she provides with the piece. So from Jennifer, I never saw snowfall as a child growing up in Southern California. It was more a phenomenon that I saw in cartoons or read in children's books. I did, however, witness my first ash fall when I was in elementary school. I looked up into the clouded sky and saw specks of ash falling from it. Excited but puzzled, I looked to my elementary school teacher during recess and held out my hand. "Oh, that's ash from the wildfires," she said. At that time, I couldn't comprehend how an enormous forest fire could create a small flurry of ash flakes. Now I have the ominous understanding that something so magical and beautiful comes from something so powerful and destructive. So as Jolly says, wildfires are absolutely destructive. And we have to think back only a couple of months to when the terrible bushfires were raging in Australia, for example, or the wildfires that just regularly have plagued California over the last number of years. But it seems that through an innate, built-in kind of persistence, even though many of the organisms do get destroyed by the fires, many of them also do rise again. In fact, some of them actually need the influence of fire to help them continue on in their life cycles. So Jennifer Jolly has given us a really intense but beautiful piece of music to describe this idea of ash and the wildfires that ash comes from. So we hope you enjoy.
We come now to our final piece on the program, and this piece, when I first heard this is the one that really inspired tonight's concert and its entire theme. But before I share with you the background of this piece, I wanted to thank you all again for joining us, either here in person or via the live stream. Now, normally we would go over to the Trishman Gallery after the concert and have a reception, but out of absolute caution and care and safety, we will not do that tonight. We'll instead be happy to greet you up here on the stage area or in the lobby area to say hi after the concert and do the appropriate elbow bump with you to say hello, because that is safety first. We also have hand sanitizer out in the lobby if you would like to use any on your way out. Please feel free. So the composer of our final piece is Omar Thomas. He is an American composer born to Guyanese parents, and he was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. He is a composer who writes fluently in both the classical and jazz idioms and often mixes them together in really interesting ways. He currently teaches at the Berklee College of Music in Boston, where he teaches a number of their music theory courses and, of course, composition. But one of the other important things that he does, which is very much tied to the piece we're going to play tonight, is that he co-chairs a group there called the LGBT Allies. And this is absolutely important in the explanation of this piece that we're going to play, A Mother of a Revolution. So I think the best thing I can do is just simply read his program note because it so perfectly describes everything that you're going to hear. So, from Omar Thomas. This piece is a celebration of the bravery of trans women, and in particular, Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson. Marsha is credited with being one of the instigators of the famous Stonewall Uprising of June 28, 1969, one of the pivotal events of the LGBTQ liberation movement of the 20th century, which is commemorated annually during the worldwide gay pride celebrations. Existing as a trans woman, especially a trans woman of color, and daring to live authentically, creating space for oneself in a transphobic world is one of the bravest acts I can imagine. Over 20 trans women were murdered in the United States in 2018 alone. There is no demographic more deserving and frankly long overdue for highlighted heroism and bravery. The disco vibe in the latter half is meant to honor a sacred space held amongst LGBTQ persons, a space to love, live, mourn, heal, strategize, connect, and dance in defiance of those outside forces who would seek to do LGBTQ persons harm simply for daring to exist and take up space. We pump our fists to honor the life, heroism, activism, and bravery of Marsha P. Johnson, to honor the legacy of the Stonewall Revolution, to honor the memory of the trans lives violently ended due to fear and hatred, and in honor of trans women worldwide who continue to exist unapologetically and who demand to be seen. This is a really incredible and incredibly meaningful piece of music. We hope you enjoy this piece, A Mother of a Revolution by Omar Thomas.